Australia. If you type in Grand Theft Auto on YouTube.
And you think that I think this is funny?
736 years were a great sentence for the evil.
Life sentences are also consecutive to 3,318 years in the Department of Corrections.
This is Ryan Stone, a man facing more than 11 charges, including attempted manslaughter, vehicular evasion, first-degree assault, and abuse for a high-speed rampage across Colorado in 2014. The incident began in Longmont, when Stone stole an SUV from a gas station. A 4-year-old boy was still strapped in the back seat of the vehicle. Stone drove off with the child inside, prompting an immediate law enforcement response and triggering a chase that would span over 75 miles. During the pursuit, Stone abandoned the SUV and carjacked a gold minivan with a family inside. He pulled the male driver out of the vehicle, while the female passenger exited on the other side of the vehicle. Stone then entered the driver's seat and took off again, this time heading the wrong way into traffic. He also struck a patrol vehicle but kept going.
My leg was actually shattered in about 20-something places.
Soon after, he collided with a woman's car, forcibly removed her from the vehicle, and stole her sedan. He would also go on to crash that vehicle in a nasty crash shortly after. With police still in pursuit, Stone attempted to carjack a third vehicle but was unsuccessful. He fled on foot, running through nearby areas before attempting to climb a fence. Officers apprehended and took him into custody shortly after. When brought before the court, Ryan was a crying mess. He claimed that he was remorseful for what he had done and begged for leniency. But the prosecution had a different story for the court. Ryan has been in and out of the system since 2003, and by all means doesn't seem like he was ready to stop anytime soon.
Stone had 5 previous felonies on his record before this chase took.
But the most damning piece of evidence had to be the recording, because during his time in custody awaiting trial, Stone received a jailhouse visit from a friend. Their conversation, recorded by surveillance, was presented in court as evidence.
My lawyer told me I made the news in the UK and Australia. If you type in Grand Theft Auto on YouTube, my comes up first.
Stone addressed the recording, saying it had been misinterpreted.
What they didn't play is the ones that do show remorse. What they didn't play is the ones that where you're sitting on the phone and you're crying.
But the damage was already done. The prosecution had done the job well, and the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Ultimately, Ryan was sentenced to 160 years in prison and would not be eligible for parole. Now, Ryan might have gotten 160 years for his grand auto spree, but how many years would a man who took the lives of 4 people get?
That's 101 years.
This is Antoine Suggs, and he is in court facing charges of murder on 4 counts after shooting and killing 4 people: Natosha Flug Presley, Matthew Pettis, Jasmine C. Sturm, and Loyas Foreman III in 2021. According to detectives, the killings happened in July 2021, with authorities discovering an abandoned SUV in a cornfield in Sheridan, Wisconsin. When investigators linked him to the crime, they also arrested his father, Darren Osborne, who authorities say helped Antoine flee the state after the murders and dump the vehicle containing the bodies. In court, Osborne later pleaded guilty to aiding an offender and was handed a 5-year sentence for his role. Suggs himself would be arrested in Gilbert, Arizona, days after he fled Wisconsin, when he turned himself into the police officers and was extradited back to Wisconsin. In court, things took a rather interesting turn because Antoine had a defense for his actions that day. He claimed that he had killed the 4 deceased people in self-defense.
My intentions were not to kill, but only to protect my life.
He also claimed that the 4 deceased people were all gang members.
Family claims that these deceased were angels all around the board. But from my observing of their Snapchat videos, the deceased were actually Crip gang members.
And during the victim impact statement and testimonies, he remained unfazed and silent.
He took my son. He left my grandchildren without a father. He left his sisters without a brother, and his nieces and nephews.
I lost 2 children, in a horrific way. I'm no longer able to tell if I am angry or depressed, or if I just have an indifference to this gaping hole in my life.
Ultimately, Antoine was found guilty on all 4 counts of murder and sentenced to 25 years for each count, to be served consecutively, not concurrently.
In doing the math, because we here in the court talks about this in terms of months, that's 101 years.
103 years and 8 months in prison. The judge had this to say to Antoine, who still held on to his self-defense argument still.
Make no mistakes. You caused their deaths. You pulled the triggers. You put them in their graves. And for that reason, you will serve this time.
Outside the courtroom, the father of one of the victims spoke to the press, satisfied at justice finally served.
Very satisfied that it's consecutive.
Antoine Suggs murdered 4 people and got just over a century, and if 100 years is the price for 4 lives, how many centuries does a man who slaughtered 12 inside a movie theater and injured 70 more get?
And then those life sentences are also consecutive to 3,318 years in the Department of Corrections.
This is James Egan Holmes in court, facing 24 counts of first-degree murder, 116 counts of attempted murder, possession of explosive devices, and inciting violence for the 2012 Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. During a midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises, Holmes opened fire inside the crowded theater, killing 12 people and injuring 70 others.
What's happening? Oh my God.
During a fight scene in The Dark Knight Rises, Batman exhorts Catwoman to put away her weapon. No killing, he says. No guns. Sadly, in the Century 16 theater last night, life did not imitate that bit of art, and the midnight premiere of that film became a killing ground.
The shooting left families and friends worried and confused as to the fate of their loved ones. Investigators also reported that James booby-trapped his apartment with explosives, which were later safely defused by authorities after his arrest. Now, before the court and facing a possibility of a death sentence, James entered a plea of not guilty by insanity. His lawyer referred the courtroom to the fact that James had no criminal record prior to the shooting. They argued that Holmes was suffering from serious mental illness, and although he was the shooter on that day, he lacked the capacity to fully understand the consequences of his actions.
There is not now, nor will there ever be, a time when it is appropriate to execute a seriously mentally ill man.
But the prosecution had a different view on what happened that day. They pointed to the evidence that the shooting was pre-calculated and deliberate, and took weeks to plan.
So here you have this situation where you've got planning, deliberation, lots and lots of time to put this plan into effect. And on the other side, long history of mental illness will become a big battle of experts here on a trial that will take many, many months.
They also pointed to the lives of people who were torn apart by James's actions that day.
I just miss my sister. Like, I miss my sister.
Do you think anything will ever help that pain go away?
Can you get me a new sister?
Even worse, there was the testimony of the court-appointed psychiatrist William Reed that Holmes was mentally ill but legally sane. He testified that James knew exactly what he was doing that day. In the end, the jury came back with a verdict of guilty with the death penalty taken off the table after a single juror voted against it during sentencing deliberations. James Holmes was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences, which came up to a total of 3,118 years in prison.
So the record is clear. It's 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, and then those life sentences are also consecutive to 3,318 years in the Department of Corrections.
The judge explained that the reason behind that maximum sentence was to ensure that James would never be a free man again.
And fair. And I am 100% sure that these are just and fair. I want to make it clear that it is the court's intention that the defendant never set foot in free society again.
James Egan Holmes would never walk the streets a free man again. But how many life terms for a defendant that turned a Christmas parade into a massacre?
Imposed here today because, frankly, you deserve it.
This is Darrell Brooks Jr. in court, facing 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 70 other charges, including reckless endangerment, for the deadly Waukesha Christmas parade attack in 2021. On November 21, 2021, Brooks drove a red Ford Escape SUV through the annual Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, deliberately running through barricades and into a crowd of parade goers. Reports say Darrell was moving at about 40 miles per hour when he struck dozens of people, killing 6 and injuring 62 others, many of them children and elderly citizens.
We want to vote 10 to 15 people down in the street. We want to got multiple critical fractures.
A happy crowd soon dissolved into hysteria as people ran up and down, searching for their loved ones.
Chelsea! With my mama! We don't care!
Eyewitnesses described the attack as sudden and unexpected.
I turn and I grab her and I pull her out of the way as the car rips past us. I scream, get out of the way, and then I start hearing some shots fired.
Despite a police officer trying to stop the SUV, Brooks didn't slow down. It wasn't until another officer fired shots at the vehicle that the chaos came to a halt.
Oh my God! Oh!
Brooks was arrested shortly after. Inside the courtroom, Darrell decided to turn the entire court proceedings into a spectacle. First, he pleaded not guilty, but it was not his plea that got people talking. Darrell took it even one step further. He decided to represent himself in his own trial.
Everyone in this room has been taught pretty much as far back as we can remember is that there's always two sides to every story.
And that's when things really started to spiral because right from the start, Brooks was determined to make sure the courtroom never forgot him.
What type of statement is that? Your life is not on the line. Mine is. And you think that I think this is funny?
I don't think it's funny whatsoever.
So I think, Your Honor, with all due respect.
He attempted to argue using pseudo-legal theories linked to the sovereign citizen movement.
So we're not going to address subject matter jurisdiction that has yet to be proven for the record.
For the record, I have addressed it.
No, you haven't proven it for the record.
And your objections noted for the record.
Have you proven subject matter jurisdiction for the record? Have you proven it?
And then he repeatedly disrespected the judge.
From 2003, criminal trespass to dwelling from 2006.
Right, I need to take a break. This man right now is having a stare down with me. It's very disrespectful. He pounded his fist, frankly.
Still, the prosecution pressed on. They presented video evidence and eyewitness accounts, building a timeline that pointed to one conclusion. Darrell's actions that day were not a moment of confusion, they were intentional.
You'll learn about Tamara Durand. Marching with the grannies, this is her first parade. You'll see a diagram of where she was positioned. You'll see video of her getting struck. The medical examiner will tell you that Tamara Durand, cause of death, multiple blunt force traumatic injuries.
The jury came back with a verdict. Guilty on all 76 charges on October 26, 2022.
Find the defendant, Darrell E. Brooks, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 3 of the information.
3 weeks later, on November 16th, the judge handed down an additional 763 years and 6 months, all to be served consecutively.
It's really symbolic given the number of years that I have imposed here today, because frankly, you deserve it.
Brooks's sentence might feel like justice served, but what if the killer isn't a terrorist or a stranger, but a 16-year-old boy who wipes out his entire family in one night? This is Scott Kalogi, a New Jersey teenager who was in court, facing 4 counts of first-degree murder for the 2017 New Year's Eve shooting in Long Branch. Just before midnight on December 31st, 2017, inside the family home, Scott opened fire using a semi-automatic rifle. He fired 14 rounds, killing his father, mother, sister, and a friend who was visiting his grandfather.
Terribly tragic incident. The 4 individuals that were killed were his the 16-year-old's 2 parents, his sister, and a family friend who lived at the residence. We will be charging this individual with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose.
Back at the police station, and in the presence of his brother who had survived the attack acting as his legal guardian, Scott Kalogi told the detectives exactly what happened.
Sit right? Opens the door.
Opens the door.
Walk in yet.
So the gun was loaded already?
Yeah.
How many times did you shoot her?
I would say 5, 7 times.
In the courtroom, the prosecutor described the shootings as deliberate and were not the actions of a vulnerable teenager. But the defense pushed back. They argued that Scott Kalogi was mentally ill at the time of the killings and asked the court to consider a reduced sentence.
This tragedy was not born from wickedness. This tragedy was born from sickness. Scott was born with a mental illness.
The defense attorney also asked the judge to impose a 30-year term, citing his client's mental illness and young age at the time of the massacre. But that was not how the court saw it. Despite the testimony, the jury found Scott Kalogi guilty on all charges. On sentencing day, Superior Court Judge Mark C. Lemieux handed down one of the harshest punishments possible under the law to Scott Kalogi, 150 years in prison. Under New Jersey's No Early Release Act, Scott will have to serve at least 127 years, 6 months, and 4 days before he is even eligible for parole. Scott Kalogi, who was just 16 when he picked up that gun, will never again see the outside of a prison wall. Not in this lifetime. Scott Kalogi learned a little too late that the court plays no favors. But if killing 4 family members earns you 150 years, how much time do you serve for shooting at 27 police officers?
736 years in prison. That is the sentence for the man behind a terror-filled shootout with police.
This is Lonnie James Pebley, a Colorado man facing several charges for opening fire on law enforcement officers during a chaotic standoff on Independence Day in 2012. It all began on July 4th, 2012, with police receiving a report of a man hiding in the brush near a Castle Rock intersection. When officers arrived, they found Pebley sitting in a parked car. But as they approached to investigate, Pebley grabbed a gun and took off. That chase led straight to his home, and that's where things exploded. Once cornered, Pebley unleashed hell. Armed with an AK-47, Pebley fired nearly 70 rounds at police officers and sheriff's deputies during a confrontation in Castle Rock. 27 officers were targeted, but none were struck.
It happened on Independence Day back in 2012. Lonnie Pebley was using an AK-47 and a handgun in this standoff.
But that was far from over. Pebley slipped out of the house using a hidden passage beneath the floorboards, vanishing before officers could jeer hold of him. What followed was a tense, 7-hour manhunt across Castle Rock with a SWAT team deployed. And just before dawn, authorities tracked him down and arrested him. The charges stacked up fast against Pebley, a staggering 46 criminal counts, including 15 counts of attempted first-degree murder, 12 counts of first-degree assault, 17 counts of reckless endangerment, and several other charges. And then came the trial. Pebley was found guilty on all charges stacked up against him, but it was far from over. Because when it came time for sentencing, the court decided that he didn't deserve second chances. Judge Paul King made it clear that every sentence would be served consecutively and not concurrently. The result was that Pebley would serve 736 years behind bars, a number so high it practically erased any possibility of Pebley ever tasting freedom again.
736 years in prison. That is the sentence for the man behind a terror-filled shootout with police on the 4th of July 3 years ago.
Outside the courtroom, the ADA announced that he believed justice had been served in the case and law enforcement officers in the community were now safer without Pebley on the streets.
And these 736 years were a great sentence for the evil that Lonnie Pebley did on these fine officers and on this community. That was a great sentence.
Shooting at cops without a single fatality earned Pebley 736 years. But how does that compare to someone who orchestrated the cold-blooded execution of 8 people and whose own family turned on him in court?
The court hereby sentences you to serve a mandatory term of life imprisonment without parole.
This is George Wagner IV, facing charges of aggravated murder for being one of the key figures behind the infamous Pike County massacre. The incident happened on the night of April 21, 2016, with 8 members of the Roden family being brutally shot and killed across 4 separate homes. 7 of the victims, including a 16-year-old boy, were executed in 3 neighboring houses. The 8th, an adult male, was found murdered in his camper just miles away. The 3 young children, including 2 infants, were left unharmed. Authorities immediately started their investigations, and they soon came to believe that the murders were carried out by people the family knew and trusted. Their suspicions soon led to investigations and arrests, and soon, George Wagner IV, his brother Jake, and their father and mother were all charged in connection with the massacre. In court, prosecutors painted George as a willing participant in the cold-blooded executions.
8 people who did not deserve to die. I want that to sink in.
But what truly sealed George's fate in the courtroom wasn't forensics or surveillance footage. It was his own family.
Brother faces brother this week in the Pike County massacre trial of George Wagner IV in Ohio.
Jake Wagner is the state's star witness, recalling in chilling detail how he and his family planned and carried out the murders of 8 members of the Roden family.
In a shocking twist, the prosecution called upon their key witnesses, his brother, Jake Wagner, and their mother, who took the stand and testified against him.
We head now to Ohio, where jurors hear from the state's second key witness in the Pike County massacre trial of George Wagner IV, as the defendant's own mother takes the stand.
The jury didn't take long. They found George guilty on 8 counts of aggravated murder, plus 14 additional charges. Then came the victim impact statements. Grieving family members and loved ones stepped up to make sure George heard exactly what his actions had done.
The God that your son learns what kind of a monster you really are and never wants anything to do with you. I pray for that.
That not only was her family murdered, but they were murdered supposedly because of her. And that it was her father and his family who had done it. See, all of us in the Roden, Manley, and Gilly families.
And finally, the judge delivered a sentence that left no room for doubt. 8 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole.
The court hereby sentences you to serve a mandatory term of life imprisonment without parole.
Plus an extra 121 years for the remaining charges. George Wagner IV will never walk free again.